Hosting your own Minecraft server actually isn't that hard, and today I'm going to show you how you can easily host one or even many Minecraft servers without any experience in networking or Linux or any of that stuff. In this video, I'm going to cover everything from what hardware to use and how to set up your first server, to how to install plugins and set up backup schedules, and even how to share your server with your friends or the entire world without having to deal with any port forwarding. Oh yeah, and other than the cost of maybe buying a cheap computer, we're going to do this entire thing for free. Let's get started. Now, having a good charger is really important, and I think that often gets overlooked. So stop overlooking it and pick yourself up one of the super impressive Nexode Pro chargers from today's sponsor, UGreen. These chargers pack a lot of power. For example, the Nexode Pro 160 watt can charge a 16-inch MacBook Pro to 50% in less than 30 minutes. This is thanks to its ability to provide 140 watts from a single port. And the 100 watt model is no slouch either, being able to provide its full 100 watts from just a single port. But you don't just get a single port. Both of these come with a Type A port, and then 2 more Type C ports with the 100 watt model, and 3 more with the 160 watt model. Having all that power doesn't mean these are big and chunky though. Thanks to the gallium nitride GaN Infinity tech inside, these chargers are actually surprisingly small. I personally find the Nexode Pro 100 watt to be perfect for me when I'm on the go. It barely takes up any space in my bag, and I can easily charge my laptop, Steam Deck, and phone, all from this little charger. The Nexode Pro lineup is compatible with just about everything since it supports USB power delivery, but it also supports other standards such as 45-watt Samsung Super Fast Charging 2.0. If you're looking for high-quality, super compact chargers, you can't really go wrong with the Nexode Pro lineup from UGreen. Make sure to check out the links in the description for more info. Now before we get started, let's talk about what all you're going to need. First of all, you're going to need a computer that isn't the computer you're using for your Minecraft server. This can be anything running Windows, macOS, Linux, whatever. And since you're playing Minecraft, I imagine there's a good chance you already have a computer. Now, unless you're setting this up on a laptop, you're going to need a keyboard and a monitor of some sort. That can be a TV, a computer monitor, it really doesn't matter, just some screen that you can plug into your Minecraft server while we're getting it configured. Once the server's set up, you won't need that monitor or keyboard again. To install the software, you're going to need a USB flash drive, and this can really be anything as long as it's 1 GB or larger. You're also going to need an Ethernet cable and access to your router, because we are going to want to plug our server in. You can technically run your server over Wi-Fi, but it's not a good idea, so just plug it in. And last, you're going to need a computer to actually run your server on. And this can be just about anything, it doesn't need to be a server of any kind. If you happen to have an older computer lying around, there's a good chance it will work. And the good news is, even if you set this up and the performance isn't as good as you need it to be, with how we set everything up, you'll be able to migrate your server to some new hardware if you decide to upgrade down the road. If you do need to buy a computer, there are quite a few options that'll work just fine. Realistically, any type of CPU that's an Intel Core i3, i5, or so on will most likely work without any issues, or an AMD Ryzen CPU is going to be totally fine as well. If the CPUs are older than that, you might run into some issues, but more than likely it'll still work, but if you try to have a lot of players or something, it might get bogged down, but once again, you can pretty easily upgrade. You'll also want at least 4 gigs of RAM, but if you want to have a lot of players or you want to run multiple servers, I would recommend at least 8 or ideally 16. For storage, unless once again you're planning on running a bunch of servers, you really only need something like a 128 gig or 256 gig SSD or hard drive. I'll have a website linked down in the description that has some more info on what you can expect performance-wise with different hardware. Now what I'm going to be using, and something I would recommend, is something like this HP ProDesk. This thing has an i7-6700, 16 gigs of DDR4 memory, and a 256 gig NVMe SSD. You can find systems like this on eBay, at least in North America, for well under $100. And if you want something smaller, they sell these little mini systems like this one here that has an i5-6500T and I believe 8 gigs of RAM, and you can find these once again for under $100. Realistically, my recommendation is finding something that's at least 4th gen i5 or up, and right now you can find pretty good deals on desktops with Intel 6th and 7th gen, so keep an eye out for those. Now you might have heard about something called a Raspberry Pi, and realistically I would just stay away from those. While they can be really cool, you can honestly get better performance for less money with plenty of other options. Alright, so we have all of our hardware. What are we going to be doing with it? Well, first we're going to be installing Debian 12, which is a Linux operating system. And don't worry that I said Linux, we're not going to have to deal with too much of the nitty-gritty command line stuff. And that's because we're going to be using something called CasaOS. This is a nice, pretty UI that you can access from a web browser that lets you manage your server and install different applications. Using CasaOS, we're going to install something called Crafty controller, which is what will let us actually spin up and manage Minecraft servers. Once we have all of that stuff set up, we can finally build Minecraft servers and manage them and install plugins and do backups and all sorts of cool things. And we'll also be able to share our Minecraft servers with our friends or anyone else using something called playit.gg. All right, so that's enough talking about it. Let's get over to my computer and start setting everything up. Okay, so I'm over at my desk and I have my soon-to-be Minecraft server sitting right over here off camera. But before we even touch that, we need to set up our install media. So the first thing I'm going to do over on my computer is go to the Balena Etcher website, and you can either Google this or click the link that I'll probably have in the description. Once we're here, we can hit download Etcher, and then you'll just select the installer for whichever operating system you're using. In my case, I'll click download for Windows. And then once you go through the install process, you should end up with something like this here. Now we could click flash from file here and download the file for Debian, which is going to be our operating system, but we can actually just flash from a URL. So if we go back to Google Chrome, for example, once again, I'll probably have this link here for Debian 12, but you can also just Google it. And if we go all the way down to where it says AMD 64, which this isn't an AMD CPU, don't worry. If you're using like an Intel i3 or any sort of like Intel CPU or AMD CPU, we'll click AMD 64. And we'll just go to copy link address. And then back in Balena Etcher, we can do flash from URL. And then paste it. Hit OK. And then we need to plug in our flash drive. Then hit select target and scroll all the way down until we find this 32 gig flash drive I have. And then hit flash. After a few minutes, we'll have our Debian install media ready to go. All right, and so it says flash completed, and we can now safely eject our flash drive. Now this part gets a little tricky because it's going to be different depending on what your computer is, but what we want to do is plug this flash drive in and then try to get to the BIOS. I'm going to go and plug it in really quick. Now for me with this HP ProDesk, I can turn it on and just keep hitting the F9 key until I eventually land at the BIOS menu, but it might be different for you depending on what your computer is. You might need to hit the delete key or F12 or F2 or essentially just Google your computer model and figure out how to get to the BIOS. But I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. And like I said, for me, I'm just going to keep hitting this F9 key. And you can see it says we're entering, oh, I was actually wrong. That took us to the boot menu, which is totally fine. I can just go back and then get to BIOS setup, which is F10. So I was wrong. It's actually F10 for me. Now this is going to look quite a bit different depending on which computer you have once again, but in this BIOS menu, there's a few things we want to double check. Typically under a menu called security or boot, you want to make sure that this can actually boot from USB. So for me, under advanced and then boot options, you can see USB storage boot. I need to make sure and check that. So a lot of times you need to hit enter or spacebar to make sure that is enabled. Sometimes this will be called USB boot or something similar. And then you also want to look for something called secure boot and typically just make sure that's completely disabled. Once USB boot is enabled and secure boot is disabled, you want to try to find the boot options menu. So for me, that's under boot options once again. And then down here, this is the order of devices that our computer is going to try to boot from. And right now it's actually going to try to boot from that M.2 SSD that's in there and already actually has Debian installed. So if I click here, I can go change the order and I'm going to put my USB drive at the very top. That way it's going to boot from this first. And now I should be able to just go back and hit save changes and exit. And once the computer reboots, we should be at the Debian installer. All right, and perfect. I didn't say this before, and I probably should have, but at this point, we want to make sure our soon-to-be server is plugged into power, obviously, as well as our monitor, keyboard, and internet, because we'll need internet access to get Debian installed. But we're going to go ahead and hit graphical install. And while this is loading, I'll go ahead and let you know that there are going to be plenty of options here I'm going to skip because they're pretty straightforward. Like, for example, this first one, I just select my language, which is English, and then my country, and my keyboard. So if I skip anything in this install process, it's most likely just sort of common sense, and if it's not, Google's going to be your best friend. And by the way, I'm navigating around these menus using the arrow keys, the tab button, and the enter button. All right, so it recognized that my computer is plugged into my network, and for this host name, you can really kind of label it whatever. I'm going to say MC-server. Then under domain, once again, this isn't that important, but I like to put local. Now it's going to ask you here for a root password, but we're actually just going to go ahead and hit enter. And that's going to skip that and make our main user the root user. So for your full name, you can type whatever you want. I'm just going to type Haven. And then for my username, I'm also going to keep that as Haven. Now here you want to make sure you type in a good password that you're not going to forget, because it's not going to be fun if you do. I'm going to use a super secure password here. Now once again, don't forget this username and password, and I'm going to refer to this as your Linux user moving forward. So here we're going to decide which disk to install Debian to, which is pretty easy because we only have one. I'm going to select guided use entire disk, and then it should be pretty obvious which one is our flash drive and which one is our SSD. So I'm going to select that. And then here we're going to select all files in one partition, and then we'll hit finish partitioning and write changes to disk, and then yes, and continue. Now I accidentally stopped recording and missed one section. You'll be asked to configure a package manager. Just select your location, the top option, and then hit enter to skip past the proxy option. For popularity contest, you can just hit no. Under software selection, we're going to deselect these first two options and just enable SSH server and standard system utilities. Then we can hit tab and enter to continue. Okay, and we're done. So at this point, we can hit continue, and then just make sure once the screen goes black, unplug your USB drive. This way, when the system boots up, it'll boot into the SSD that we just installed Debian on. And there we go. After a few seconds, we should be sitting at something that looks like this, and this is where we can log in. So we're gonna log in with that Linux user we made. So for me, that's Haven, and then my super secure password. Now I told you guys we're not gonna do a whole bunch of nitty gritty gross command line stuff, but there's gonna be just a little bit of it, but we're almost done. We're almost to the cool part, I promise. So the first thing we're gonna type in here is sudo, sudo, and then apt, update, and then hit enter. And it's gonna ask for your Linux user password. Now you won't see that password when you're typing it, just type it, hit enter, you'll be good. Now most likely this will just say all packages are up to date, and if so, that's fine. If not, you can type in sudo apt upgrade and then -y, but since we don't have any to upgrade, it's not gonna do anything. Next, we're gonna type in sudo once again, and then apt install curl, and then hit Y for yes. We also could have typed in that -y flag and that would have worked. And then we're going to use that curl package to download CasaOS. So to do that, it's curl, and then -f, s, capital L, and then space, then https://get.casaos.io. Then we're going to type a space, and then what's called a pipe, which is just this straight up and down line. Then another space, and then sudo. It's really important that you put that sudo there, bash. And we can hit enter. And you should see something like this. CasaOS is going to take a few minutes to install, so go grab a cup of coffee or whatever, and I'll meet you back here in just a minute. So after a few minutes, we're greeted with this screen here, and CasaOS is up and running. So down at the bottom of the screen, you can see it says http://192.168.10.205, and that is the local IP address of our server. Don't worry, this isn't your public IP. Anyone can know this, and they're not going to be able to access your server or anything like that. It's just your local IP, but this is how we're going to be able to access our server on our local network. So at this point, you can actually unplug your keyboard and your monitor and just run your server, what we call headless, with no screen, no keyboard or anything like that, and access it from the web browser. So over in my web browser, I can type in that IP address, 192.168.10.205, and hit enter. And now we're on the CasaOS screen. Now I want to mention really quick, this IP address is assigned via something called DHCP, which hands out local IP addresses to all the devices on your network. And this can change unless you set up what's called a DHCP reservation. To do that, you basically just log into your router and then most likely look for some settings labeled DHCP, and then you'd find this IP address and reserve it somehow. Each router brand is a little bit different, so you might have to Google for your router how to do that. It's not required, most likely if the server's running most of the time. It won't change, but it's a good idea to do it just in case it does change, because it'll be a little bit hard to find what IP address your server is. You'll have to plug a monitor back in, and that's no fun, so I do recommend going to your router and setting up DHCP reservation. But let's go ahead and move on. So we're here, we're at CasaOS, we can hit go, and then we're going to make a new username and password, and I'm going to refer to this as the CasaOS username. So I'm going to call it Haven, and you do have to make a slightly more secure password here. It has to be 8 characters. And then we'll hit create, and we're good to go. I'm going to just hit cancel on this news feed, and we're now in CasaOS. We can see some cool stuff here. We can see our CPU utilization, we can see our RAM utilization, we can see our storage here, we can see our network status, And some other stuff up here, like we have a few basic settings. And then we also have the ability to log in using our Linux username here and get back to a terminal if we want to do any command line stuff again. We also have this files browser here where you can see we have a documents folder, we have a downloads, media, and we have this app data folder here. And then here's the real cool part of CasaOS, that's the App Store. So these are a bunch of different applications you can install and run on your server, but the one we're going to install is this one right here that says Crafty. So we can just click install. And then this gives us the default account login, which is admin and Crafty. I'll just refer to this as our Crafty user. So we have Linux user, CasaOS user, and Crafty user. Keep track of them all. Okay, so it says installation completed, but there's actually potentially an issue if you're installing this right after I publish this video. There's currently an issue with CasaOS that causes Crafty not to install properly, but don't worry, it's a really easy fix and I'll show you how to do it. If we go here to settings, and then we go up here to terminal and logs, and then over to logs, we can see we're getting some of these errors here, these permission denied errors. And once again, that's because there's what seems to be a small bug with CasaOS on this specific release as I'm making this video. But like I said, there's an easy way around it, and I'll show you how to do that. If we scroll down these settings, we can kind of see what's going on here. Essentially, this Crafty application is actually what's called a Docker container. Don't worry too much about it, but it's essentially taking an application or multiple applications and putting them in one little container that's really easy to install in different places and really quickly, like we just did. There's a few settings that this automatically set up for us, like which port the web UI is going to be at, all of these ports that it's passing through for being able to run various Minecraft servers. If you're familiar with Minecraft servers, you know that the default port is 25565. Which is right down here, but there's a whole bunch of other ports it's passing through from our server into this Crafty container so we can run Minecraft servers on them. Don't worry if you don't understand it, it's totally fine. But down here we have our volumes. Once again, you don't have to understand this entirely, but we have some of these folders, like a folder for our backups, a folder for logs, a folder for our servers, our config. And these all live in this /data/app data. And like I said, there's what seems to be a bug with CasaOS currently in how it installs applications and how it installs Docker containers where there's a permissions issue. So what we can actually do is just not use this /data/app data. We can make our own folder and bypass this issue. So what we're going to do is go back to this file browser, and we're just going to go up to the very top where it says root, and then home, and then Haven. And this is our Linux user home folder. And in this folder, we're just going to hit create and then make a new folder and call it Crafty and hit submit. Now we'll exit out of that. And we'll see here Crafty's all grayed out because it had a bunch of errors and didn't start properly. So we're going to go back to settings and we're going to fix it. So if we scroll all the way down past all these ports to these volumes here, what we're going to do is instead of this /data/app data Crafty backups, we're going to click this little button here and go all the way back to the top until we get to this root folder and then home, double click on Haven, and then there's our Crafty folder. So we're going to select that, but we need another folder in there called backups. So I'm going to do /backups, and then I'm just going to copy paste this first part of this string here and paste it to all of these others. So instead of saying /data/app data /crafty /whatever these are, it'll say /home /haven /crafty /whatever these are. After that, we can hit save. And this Crafty container is going to try to spin up once again, but this time it should work. So if we go back to settings, and then up here where it says terminal and logs, we can see we're not getting all of those permission errors. We get all this good looking stuff. It even says Crafty has fully started. And we can even go back to files and go back to root, home, Haven, Crafty, and we can see we have all of these folders now, and there's actually cool stuff in there. And that's because that container for Crafty mounted to these folders on our server and started putting cool stuff in there. Okay, so it's all set up, it's running. Let's go ahead and click on Crafty. And the first time you click on it, you'll probably get this screen. That's just fine. Just hit click here. And then don't worry about this. Your connection is not private. It's totally fine. Just hit advanced and then proceed. Now we can use that Crafty login it gave us, which is admin and password Crafty. Hit enter. And we're here. We did it. I'm going to skip this survey. We are at our Crafty dashboard, and this is where we can start doing really cool stuff. And one of the first things you might want to do is go up to settings And then you can go over here to new password, and we're going to get rid of that Crafty password just because it's the default and everyone's going to know what it is. Let's go ahead and create a Minecraft server. So to do that, we can go over here to servers and hit create new server. And there's a few different options here for importing different servers or just creating your own. There's also a Bedrock option, which I'm not going to touch on because I'm a Java Minecraft guy, and that's what we're going to stick to for this video. But it is an option, which is really cool. So back over in Minecraft Java, we're going to create a new server. And under server type, there's a few different things here. For example, you can just do a vanilla Minecraft server, which is great, but I like to go with servers and then use the paper server. The paper server is a bit more lightweight, so it's great for older computers, for example, and for just saving some power. The latest version here is 1.19.4, which is perfect because that's the version I'm still currently running. And under server name, I'm just going to type in server 1. Under minimum memory, we'll just keep this at 1, and then maximum memory, this is going to depend on how much RAM you have and how many servers you're wanting to run. If you only have 4 gigs of RAM, I would probably only set this at 3, that way you have another gig of memory for the operating system to use. If you have 8 gigs and you're only going to want to run server, you might as well set it to like 7 or 6 or 7, something like that. Ideally, the more RAM, the better, but if you're only running a small server with a few people, it's probably going to be fine to have a smaller amount. I'm going to go ahead and just say 6. And then under server port, the default is 25565, but if you're running multiple servers, you're going to have to change this to something else. That way those ports don't conflict. Since this is our first server, I'm just going to use port 25565, and then I'll hit build. After a few seconds, we should be able to hit this start button, and it's going to ask us to accept the Minecraft EULA. We'll hit yes, and you can see it's spinning up here. And if we actually click on server 1, we can look at the terminal here and see these logs, and it looks like everything is working as expected. So in Minecraft, I can go to multiplayer, add server, and we're going to call this server 1. And then for server address, we're going to type in that 192.168.10 and then 205. Obviously change this to be whatever your IP address of your server is. Now I could type :25565 to tell it which port to use, but the default is 25565, so I can actually just leave this blank. We'll hit done. And it looks like it's working. If we double click on it, we should be able to connect. And there we go. We are in our Minecraft server. And it looks like it's working just fine. If we go back to Crafty, we can actually go to player management, for example, and see that Hardware Haven is online, and I have the option to ban myself, kick myself, or assign myself as OP, which I'm going to do. Now there's also a lot of other really cool stuff you can do here. For example, you can look at metrics and see how many players are logged on and see your CPU usage and memory usage. You can go to config and adjust certain settings. Some of them that are probably worth turning on is this server auto start and server crash detection. We'll hit save. This file section is really important, and we'll come back to this when we're doing some other stuff like adding in some plugins. Now here where it says backup, we can actually set up backups, which are really important if you want to make sure that if something terrible happens to your server, you have a good way to restore it from a previous backup. So you can change this storage location, but I would just keep it at what it is by default. And then max backups, you can either leave this at 0 to mean it will keep all of your backups, or you can set a limit, for example, 10, and then only your most recent 10 backups will stay saved. Now there's this option for shutdown server during backup, and I do sort of recommend this because I've noticed some weird things in the past where when you back up the server while it's still running, it might miss certain things. So I'm going to check this and then hit save. Then actually just for fun, back in Minecraft, we can go build something. So we'll build these 3 blocks here. We'll back up the server, and then we can see we have this backup over here. Now, if I go back to Minecraft, I can destroy these 3 blocks. And then back in Crafty, I can hit restore. Back in Minecraft, these 3 blocks are here just like they were before. So backups are super, super useful, and they're even more useful if you set up what's called a schedule. So back in Crafty under server 1, we can go to this schedule tab and hit create new schedule. And then here we're going to call this weekly backup. Obviously you could do daily or whatever else. And we're going to say basic action backup server, and then under interval we want to say every 7 days, and then under time we can just say something like 3 a.m. and then if we hit save, We can see that the next run is on the 8th of January and will run every 7 days. It doesn't seem like there's a way to pick which day exactly this starts, but yeah, it's still great. I would recommend probably doing like a daily backup, but you can actually set multiple. So you could have one that's done every day and then one that's done once a month or something like that. You could have multiple backups. Now, if you really want to be safe, you can actually go back to CasaOS here, and under Files, you can go find our root folder, Home, Haven, and then Crafty, and go to Backups, and you can see we have this folder here with some weird text. This is a little bit unideal, but if we go back to Crafty, you can see the UUID of this server. So this 3C DAD or 3C DAD, and we can see that UID, find the folder, and then this is where all of our backups for our server live. So if you want to copy these to your own computer or copy them to a flash drive or whatever else, that's a good way of having those backups off of your server. That way, if your server, catches fire or something, you can still build a new server and then put these on that one. So it's good to take these backups from your server and save them somewhere else. That way, if your SSD crashes or something, you have a good backup. Now let's say something like that does happen and you need to restore that backup to a new server. Now, speaking of restoring a backup, let's actually do that. Let's say we had a server that something happened. Let's say, for example, someone built this house and we had a backup from before this house was built. And I still want to keep this on one server, but let's say I want to run another server with the backup from before this little house was built. So this is server 1 right now. Let's make a new server. So we'll go to create new server. And this time, instead of going under this Create New Server menu, we're actually going to go to Upload Zip File for server import. So back in CasaOS, I'm actually going to download this backup. And then back in Crafty, in this Upload Zip File for server import, I can go to Browse, and then just upload the zip file from our backup, and we'll call this Server 2. Hit Upload. And then here where it says click here to select root directory, we don't have a root directory under this, so we'll just hit Save. And actually back in this menu, we can just highlight this paper.jar here. And then under server executable file, we'll just paste that. And then here I'm going to give it a max memory of just 4 because why not? Now for server port, we can't use 25565 again, so we actually need to change that to something like 25566 and then hit import server. Now this is looking good, but if we actually go into server 2, we're going to see that there's an issue. If we try starting the server, we're going to get this error, and that's because the address is already in use, because up here it says starting Minecraft server on 25565. And this is because while we told Crafty that the server was going to be on port 25566, because we actually imported the server.properties file, the server tried to start with the original port. So what we can do is go to Files, and then scroll down to the server.properties and click it. And then over here under Query Port, we'll change that to 25566. And then down under server port, we can also change that to 25566, hit save, and then go back and start our server again, and we should be good. All right. So in our dashboard, you can see we have 2 servers running, server 1 and server 2. And if I go back to Minecraft, I can add that new server, 192.168.10.205, but this time I need to specify that port. So 25566, hit done. And here we go. We're on our second server currently, which doesn't have that house thing that I built. But if we go back to our first server, you can see it's also running. It's nighttime actually, and we have that house. All right, now let's say we want to start a new server, but we don't want to use just a randomly generated world. We want to use a world that we downloaded from the internet. I actually already downloaded this Skyblock 2.1 zip here, which is a Skyblock world, which is my favorite way to play Minecraft. And I'm going to create a server using that Skyblock world. So I'm going to go back to create new server. I'm going to once again use paper here. And then I'm going to call this Skyblock, give it 4 gigs of RAM, and then we'll set this to port 25567. Now, because we're building this server from scratch, when we type in this port 25567, that will actually build that server.properties file to say 25567, so we won't have to go back and change it. So let's hit build server. But now before running this server, we're going to upload our world folder. If we go to it and go to files, we can see there's not a whole lot in here. So to upload our Skyblock world, we can just right click where it says files and hit upload. And we're just going to choose this .zip. And you will want this to be a .zip, otherwise you'll have to upload each single file individually because you can't upload folders. Fortunately, once this skyblock-2.1.zip is in here, you can unzip it, and then we'll rename this new folder to just world. And we can delete this macOS folder, and we'll delete this original .zip. So now our files are the exact same other than this world folder that we uploaded. And within this, there's all of this other stuff. Now you might be tempted to just go into CasaOS in the file browser, find your new server, whichever one it is, and upload the world folder here. And that sort of works, but you run into a weird permissions error that can be fixed if you understand some Linux stuff, but I recommend not doing that, and I recommend just doing it from the Crafty controller. That'll make sure the permissions are all correct, and you shouldn't have any issues. So let's give it a shot. We're going to go back to terminal here and hit start. We'll agree to the EULA again, and it looks like we're all good. Let's go add this server to our Minecraft server list. Once again, 192.168.10.205, and then we'll add the port as 25567 Skyblock. And now if we connect to this new server, we should see a cool new Skyblock world instead of the standard vanilla. And look at that. We are in Minecraft Skyblock. We've got our ice block, our lava bucket. Our custom world is working. Now let's talk about plugins, because if you're running a server, that's probably something you need to use. For our main Minecraft server, I already downloaded this Essentials plugin, this .jar here, and we need to add it to our server. So under server 1 files, we can go to the plugins folder, and we'll right click and hit upload, choose files, and then we'll upload this .jar. Hit upload. Once that's uploaded, we can just go back to the terminal here, hit restart, and you can see as the server's starting up here, we see all of these Essentials messages. So it looks like it worked. After making sure I'm set as an OP in our original Minecraft server, I can type in something like /fly and then hardware haven, and now I can fly. Look at that. Okay, so we have plugins working, we have our servers working, even a Skyblock world, but now we might want to share that server with our friends that may not be living in our house with us. If your friends just try to type in that 192.168 IP that you have, it's not going to work because that's your local IP address that only works on your local network. Now you could share your public IP address and set up port forwarding through your router, but that can be a little bit dangerous, a little bit sketchy, and you also have to figure out a lot of more complicated things. So there's actually a much easier way with a website called playit.gg. And if we go to their website, there's this download button. And rather than downloading it for Windows or Linux or macOS, we're going to actually download this plugin, which I already did. And since this is just a plugin, you might already know where we're going with this. Back in our server 1 files here, we can go to plugins, right click and hit upload. And we're going to upload the playit.jar. And then after we restart the server, you'll start getting these gg.playit messages here with a to claim, visit this web address. And this will also show up in the actual Minecraft chat as well. So only run this the first time when you're the only person in the server. We'll copy it and then paste it into our web browser. And now if this is your first time using playit.gg, you'll need to make a new account. I already have one, so I'm going to log into that. And then once you either log in or create your account, you should be met with this waiting for agent to connect. And it looks like it did. All right, and once this automatic stuff all finishes, you should end up with something like this, where we can see we have this tunnel created with this URL of ready-cherry.joinmc.link. And I can actually hit view tunnel. And under this agents tab, we can see our server with our public IP, so don't share this with people, just don't share that with people. And then under tunnels, we can see this. And essentially how playit.gg works is whoever wants to connect to your Minecraft server actually connects to the playit.gg servers, so they don't connect to your IP address. And then from those servers, it's tunneled into your Minecraft server using something called essentially a VPN tunnel. So it's not 100% safe. Anytime you expose anything on your local network to the internet, there's always some risk involved, but it's substantially more safe than just port forwarding and sharing your IP. All right, so now we can actually just copy this ready-cherry.joinmc.link, go back to Minecraft, we'll call this server playit, and for the address, we're gonna put this ready-cherry.joinmc.link and hit done. Now this may take a while. The first time I ran this when I tested, it actually took a while for this to finally work, but it looks like it's already working. I can double click on this, and I'm actually back in my original server that I made, but I'm not connected via my local IP address. You can actually see when I log into the server locally using our original setup here, we're in our server, it's raining, But if I go back to the logs, you can see down here, it says Hardware Haven logged in from 192.168.10.85. That's my local IP address on my network. That's my desktop PC. But if I go back to Minecraft and I connect using playit.gg, we're on the exact same server. But if I go back to the logs, you can see I'm actually logged in through this 127.0.0.1 address. And not to get too complicated here, that's actually a local address. That means I'm logged in from the server, but that's because it's being tunneled through. Don't worry about it. But yeah, I'm accessing the server right now over the internet, not just locally over my local network. Now, playit.gg isn't sponsoring this video or anything, but they do have some options you can pay for, like having a custom domain or just some advanced features if you want to run more than, I think, 4 servers is the max for the free version. So pretty cool for a free service. There might be issues at times with connection because, once again, it's a free service, but in my short experience, it's actually been really good. And yeah, it's free and much safer than port forwarding. All right, guys, I think that's pretty much it. At this point, we've set up 3 different servers. We've talked about backups and backup schedules and installing plugins and even connecting to this over the web. I think that pretty much is going to wrap it up. If you have any questions or run into issues, first of all, Google's going to be your best friend, but you can also put those questions in the comments to this video, and I probably won't respond for years down the road or anything, but especially if I see multiple comments of the same issue, I'll try to address those in a pinned comment or in the description. So just have a peek around down there if you run into any issues. Also, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, all that stuff. But if you're also interested in hosting more of your own stuff, there's a lot more you can do with this server you just built. Since you're running CasaOS, you can take a look at this app store and see a lot of different fun things you can host, like, for example, Home Assistant, where you can automate smart devices in your house, or something like Plex or Jellyfin to stream your own library of movies and shows, or something like Pi-hole or AdGuard Home to have some network-wide ad blocking. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do, and if that sounds like something you're interested in, maybe subscribe to my channel and watch some of the other videos, because self-hosting can be a lot of fun, and I highly encourage you to give it a shot. Anyway, you should hopefully have a working Minecraft server. I hope you have a lot of fun with it, but I think that's about it for this one. So, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay curious, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.